one of the things that I like to do when I teach basic things like stop and go is I do clicker training. Are you familiar with clicker training at all?
I am, but would you just, if you don't mind, give a brief description for those that may be listening that don't have a familiarity with it?
Okay. I learned clicker training from a friend of mine, Shauna Karash, who was a trainer at SeaWorld with the killer whales.
Yeah.
Yeah, for 10 years she was a trainer with SeaWorld, and that they use this clicker training. And the idea behind the clicker training is that you increase the animal's motivation. It's all positive reinforcement. You're increasing their motivation to do what you're asking them to do. And oftentimes you're asking them to do things that they wouldn't do naturally, but you motivate them to do these things. So, and what you do in the beginning is you create what's called, it's called bridge conditioning. And the device that we use, it's sort of like, it makes a sound like a little cricket. You press it with your thumb and it makes a little snap like a little cricket noise. And the truth is you could use anything to bridge condition. You could clear your throat like that. You could do anything. But the thing about the little thing that you can click is that it makes the same sound with the same tone at the same volume every single time, and everybody can do the same thing. So it's nice to have a little device like that. So in the beginning, you bridge condition your animal so that they associate, it's sort of like Pavlov's dogs, they associate the sound of the click with a food reward, because in the beginning you click and you reward the behavior you want. Click and reward, click and reward. And then eventually you can actually click without having to give the food reward. And according to Shauna, you could probably go 10 to 15 repetitions before you would have to reinforce the fact that the click meant the same thing as the food reward. But the reason that I like this is you start on the ground. You start on the ground where you feel safe, and you're doing these little baby steps. And with the little setup that Shauna gave me, I had sort of like a plastic container, I don't know, about 3 inches by 3 inches square, and it was around my waist by a web belt, and there was grain in it. And I was in my horse's stall, and I had my arm over the top of the grain. And of course, you know, my horse is like snorkeling around and trying to get to the grain, and my arm is covering it so he can't get to the grain. And then finally, a little bit in frustration or bewilderment, I'm not sure what was going through his mind, or even just by accident, he turns his head away from the grain, which is not what they would do by nature. And at that moment, I would click and then give him a handful of grain. And I'd repeat that process until he realized that the way to get the reward is not to do what seemed instinctive to him, which was to stick his nose in the little bucket of grain, but to turn his head away from the grain. And that was the beginning of being able to use the clicker training to I mean, you can do it for riding issues like I'm talking about stop and go, but I've used it for a lot of behavioral issues.